I want to remind members to switch off their mobile phones. It interferes with the broadcast capability. We have apologies from Deputy Eamon Maloney, from Senators Laura Samuraku, Ned O'Sullivan and Fiach McAneill. The meeting is being convened for the purpose of the consideration by this committee of matters relating to the consultation paper on the establishment of an electoral commission in Ireland, and the committee will now discuss the matter. Is that agreed? Okay, it's proposed that this part of our meeting shall conclude, this part of the meeting will conclude at 3:30, unless previously concluded, and there will be a break of about 5 minutes to allow witnesses for session 2 to take their places. Session 2 will conclude at 4:45, if not previously concluded, and the committee shall go into private session. Is that agreed? Okay, I want to welcome the following witnesses to the meeting. Dr. Liam Weeks, of the Department of Government at University College Cork, Mr. Jimmy McNeill, Principal of the Department of Finance, and Mr. Paul Lambert, Solicitor and Author of Data Protection Law in Ireland. I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are requested by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are thereafter only entitled to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable. It is proposed that all of the opening statements and any other documentation supplied may be published on the committee website after the meeting. Is that agreed? Okay, I'm now going to call on Dr. Weeks to make his opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. The consultation paper has posed a wide range of questions, some of which are secondary matters and cannot be answered in the statement. For example, issues concerning the cost of a commission depend on the remit afforded such a body. I am not in a position to answer all these questions, as issues such as the independence of the commission and how it is to be established are matters for powers higher than my own to decide. What I would like to discuss, however, are the functions that would be afforded to such a commission, and for me this really is the key question. Some other experts in the past few weeks have already presented here and have addressed a number of areas the proposed commission could tackle. I will focus on one, the area of research and education. By research, I do not mean anodyne academic papers that no one reads, but rather an actual monitoring of the system, whether it is fit for purpose, international best practice in the area, and so on. Let me begin by stating that the current process is frankly an Irish solution that creates an Irish problem. I have observed elections in a number of countries, including transition democracies in the likes of Fiji, Samoa and Tonga, and one of the first steps taken on the road to democracy is to adopt an electoral commission. So we in Ireland seem to be rather slow on the uptake. The primary reason why Ireland needs an electoral commission is to carry out research into the electoral process and to educate voters and the population about this process. A commission is required to maintain the operation of the electoral process, which does not really happen at the moment. Systems and processes evolve in other walks of life, but in the area of elections it seems to stand still. For example, the area of personal banking has moved from being able to withdraw money from only the local branch, to any branch, to ATMs, and now to online banking. Why is no organisation monitoring the practice of elections in Ireland that could oversee a similar type evolution? We are still using pretty much the same system for the past 100 years with very little review of the process. For example, we must register at a police station. We must vote at a local school. We must still use pen and paper. We are still using limited constituency sizes of 3, 4 and 5 seats, when it is well known that proportional representation can only be achieved with constituencies of 5 seats or more. There is no reason, for example, why we cannot have larger constituencies given the small size of Ireland, and I refer to the recent European Parliament elections as an example of this. For example, South Australia, with the population 11 times larger than the island of Ireland, uses the same electoral system as ourselves, and yet treats the state as a single constituency for elections to the Federal Senate. Other areas in which the electoral rules have not evolved include the use of an inequitable arbitrary means of distributing surplus votes and the alphabetical listing of candidates on the ballot paper. Tasmania, for example, uses Robson rotation. New Zealand, the Meek method. Australia and Scotland, the Whig method. Are voters aware of all these different methods? Are the administrators aware of all these different methods? Why is there no consideration of these or of research into these particular areas? For example, Australia is a fine example to mention. It uses the same electoral system as Ireland for federal, state, territorial and local government elections. They produce regular reports on the operation of the system and how it could be improved. They also hold regular conferences to discuss various aspects that I have mentioned of the electoral process, from voter registration to lowering the minimum age to vote to the actual formal design of the ballot paper. In Ireland, there has been a lot of talk recently about reform of the voting system, but it being specified in the Constitution is being used as an excuse to prevent change. However, there are many aspects of the voting system that could be altered by simple legislation without the need for an actual referendum. This has happened in Australia, where the single transferable vote system was transformed into a de facto party list system, even though it is still STV in name. And this came about following representations by, amongst other groups, the Federal Electoral Commission. Now, I'm not advocating such changes, but this is an example of the role such a body could take in Ireland to investigate such matters. There are a vast range of areas that the proposed Commission could look into that I'm happy to discuss further. But the final issue to mention is voter education. Voters are not told how to vote in Ireland or how the electoral system operates. Do voters know the value of a third, fourth or fifth preference, or the value of casting preferences full stop? This is important because we know that the large volume of non-transferable votes, estimated by Sean Donnelly to be about 12% at the last election, can have an impact on the final outcome. There could be voter education programmes for the large non-Irish population entitled to vote at local and for EU citizens' European Parliament elections. Similar programmes could take place for British citizens who can vote at Dáil elections. Likewise, for the travelling community. Do we even know what proportion of the non-Irish and travelling community vote at elections in Ireland? Finally, symptomatic of the failings of the current system is the severe lack of online public information about elections and election results in Ireland. Brief summaries are available on the Department of Environment website for the last set of Dáil and local elections, but that is the limited extent of this coverage. Compared to that available for other countries, it is woefully inadequate. Ireland urgently needs an electoral commission. Thank you.
Dr. Weeks. Mr. McNeill.
Chairman, firstly, I wish to thank you and the committee for giving an opportunity to the Department of Finance to contribute to the discussion on the establishment of an electoral commission in Ireland, and I would also like to wish the committee well in its deliberations. My comments will be brief. The Department's role in the electoral system is quite narrow and specific, but nevertheless is an important one. I should explain that the costs for returning officers for the conduct of elections and referendums are paid directly from the central fund by the Department. The Department is responsible for the central fund and for drawing up the finance accounts, which are the annual accounts of that fund. The Department supports the view that returning officers' costs should continue to be charged to the central fund. The alternative of charging them to a vote would not be appropriate or practical. Because of the way the current system works, the Department has much of the accountability for election expenditure, even though its role in the system has been reduced since the establishment of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. The Department is suggesting that accountability for returning officer costs should transfer to the Electoral Commission. The costs would continue to be charged in aggregate to the central fund. However, the Commission would make onward disbursements to the returning officers and would account for them. We think this would be a more transparent system compared to the current approach. Based on our experience, we also consider that an Electoral Commission framework around returning officers would enable a greater level of coordination among the returning officers. This would allow them to resolve common issues and to deal with logistical matters on a collective basis. It might even facilitate greater efficiencies in the conduct of elections and referendums. To summarise, the Department of Finance position is that the Electoral Commission should have a role in the financial arrangements for the conduct of elections and referendums and should have accountability in that respect. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Lambert.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. Thank you for your invitation and the opportunity to contribute to your deliberations and work. I understand that one of the matters that arising is in relation to the issue of data protection, and in particular the possibility of using PPSN numbers for the purposes of compiling a central or rolling register of electors by the new Electoral Commission. So I'd just like to make some broad comments in relation to that. In the documentation so far, it appears there's been no very detailed examination of the data protection issues, and the comments in relation to data protection have been quite broad and headline in nature. So there is an opportunity to kind of expand that in more detail, both the Electoral Commission itself when it's set up, but also in the ongoing process. I'd also support the previous comments of the prior Data Protection Commissioner in relation to these particular issues as well. One of the starting points in relation to this type of discussion is in relation to alternatives. So while we're thinking about PPSN numbers, we should also stop and ask, well, is there anything before that that we might think of as being solutions to some of the concerns and problems that arise? Some of these have been mentioned already in terms of matching consent, computer identifiers, but there may be other solutions to some of the problems as well. So we shouldn't just leap forward and go straight to, oh, let's create a new exemption in relation to data protection usage. If there is an issue after looking at those alternatives in relation to considering PPSN numbers, we should look at what the justification for that is, and also make sure that however it is defined and elaborated is clear, justified and limited, so that what is intended for one purpose isn't so open-ended that it can be used for other purposes or other justifications, or effectively become an example of mission creep, where other unintended consequences can arise down the road. And it's important in the discussion, while some issues and concerns have been raised, it's important to separate these different purposes out and consider each purpose individually. So it may be at the end of the day that purpose 1 might be justified, but purpose 4, 5 and 6 may not be. So each activity, each purpose needs individualised consideration. One of the principles to bear in mind from the data protection perspective is the concept of, I suppose, data minimisation and also proportionality. So while we can create an exemption, we shouldn't necessarily leap to the widest exemption possible. There should be a proportionality to what it is we're actually creating in an exemption, if there is to be an exemption. Some other things, separate things to bear in mind as well, and some of these have been briefly flagged, but there is a strong argument that the PPSN shouldn't appear on the register itself, and also may not or should not be attached to the register itself. There's also an issue in terms of verification and identification. If we're creating an exemption for creating the register, that's quite separate and distinct from using the PPSN for identification purposes on voting day. And I think there's a strong argument for leaning against relying on PPSN for pure identification purposes on election day. So that's an example as well as where we should, I suppose, put a little bit of detail into separating the problems and the possible data protection issues and purposes for individualised consideration. Security is always an issue, particularly nowadays in relation to data protection and personal data, but it's a particular issue in terms of PPSN also. Separate issues in terms of marketing. If there's a central register, that shouldn't be just available to people for marketing purposes. The ability of individual citizens to opt out of marketing purposes should be contained or continued over into a central register. And I suppose just to comment, or finally, utilising PPSN per se isn't necessarily a magic bullet to all of the various issues and concerns that can arise in relation to the register issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. We're now going to go to questions from the members. Now, generally, again, about a 10-minute contribution, split evenly with questions and answers. And I want to remind members, if they've used their full 10 minutes to make statements, there won't be time for the witnesses to respond. Okay, we're with Deputy Stanley.
Yeah, thanks, Gaeltacht, and thanks to the panel as well for their presentation and their views on some of these matters that have been taxed on us recently. I note that there's broad agreement among the three panellists in relation to the need for a commission, the establishment of a commission, and it's certainly a view that I would share. In relation to, just in relation to Liam Weeks' statement in relation to proportional representation, you know, are you suggesting that the that constituency should be 5 or more, should be 5 or 7, or should we just have a complete, maybe maybe a list system based across the state or on a provincial basis, and just a rationale behind that. That is obviously a question because, you know, we see substantial shifts that all people in all parties are casualties of, or benefactors of, depending on which way it works out, in terms of, you know, ad hoc changes that are made by boundary commissions, you know, county boundaries chewed up, maybe for good reason, you know, complete new geography, electoral geography, you know, from one election to the next, and 5-seaters being turned into 3-seaters, etc. You know, it makes it appears to me to be very precarious and very ad hoc. But just you might deal with that, how you would bed that down. My own opinion is that maybe that you would, to be easier to have a more fixed boundaries in terms of if the area was bigger, because it's easier to tweak it. Just in relation to the Department of Mr. McNeill's comments in relation to the Department of Finance, you know, you seem to be suggesting there that the Electoral Commission would handle the funding and coordinate the funding, and you know, obviously that would be a benefit, but also that Electoral Commission would have a coordinating role in relation to the role of the returning officers, and that, which makes some sense. I just wondering what you see the role of local authorities in all of that. Is there a role for local authorities? What's the role of local authorities in terms of, from the Department of Finance's point of view, in terms of elections, or do they have a role at all? I would hope to have, because they are local government, but it's the role of local authorities in elections. And just with the vexed question, of the PPS numbers, you know, you said that alternatives to the PPS numbers should be explored, less intrusive, such as consent or computer identifiers. Just maybe you might explain that a little bit, or are there other methods maybe that, Mr. Lambert, that you've looked at maybe in other countries, maybe that, you know, are there obvious ones that would identify, could be used as an identifier, maybe simple examples. The one we have here, the address-based system, it isn't working, and you can see that if you pick up any register, you can see that there's some people not on it at all. They should be on it, and there's some people on it several times, and there's some people on it who shouldn't be on it. It's very, you know, the accuracy of it is very poor. You mentioned that obviously that the PPS number shouldn't appear on the register, and I think I would certainly agree with that. But just on voting day, when you mentioned that the PPS number shouldn't be, and I can see a good reason for not using it for verification on voting day, you know, you suggest maybe the other forms, just other simple forms of ID, such as a driver's license or passport. But certainly one problem I've come across is that some people have neither. You know, it's accepted, general acceptance that people have bank accounts and that have driver's licenses and to have passports. But I know people, and I'm sure everybody else does, know people who have neither. They don't actually have any form of identification, either of those 3 forms of identification. Yeah, that's about it. But I think maybe just your view as well on the view of the panel on just having a rolling register, that we can, you know, join the register at any time. As it is here, it's very, very restrictive, and, you know, having to go to Garda stations, you know, should it be the case maybe that peace commissioners should be allowed to verify the fact that Joe Bloggs is Joe Bloggs and that he does live at such and such an address. You know, are there other ways of handling that verification process?
Thank you, Deputy. Mr. Weeks.
Yeah, in relation to proportional representation, I mean, it's not really my role to advocate a particular system, but I think this is the role that an actual commission could be investigated. For example, you asked, if we should have more seats. Personally, if you want stricter PR, so for example, let's say in 2007, Fianna Fáil wins about 49% of seats with 41% of first preferences. If you want strict PR, you're simply going to have larger constituencies. When we can, as you mentioned, in terms of moving populations, John Coakley has done some research on this, and he advocated the idea of having fixed boundaries in much larger constituencies. So then, as the population alters inside these fixed boundaries, these particular constituencies would lose or gain seats. I would imagine a problem which the returning officers would highlight is if you had larger constituencies, it's going to make voting a lot more complicated, particularly when it comes to the surplus vote. Of course, when it gets more complicated, you might need something like machines then to count votes, which is what happens in most other systems that use. In fact, I think almost every other system that uses our voting system, apart from Malta, but the numbers of votes there are very small. Every other system using STV seems to use machines to count these votes. But anyway, my point would be there is no research into this area. The Department of Environment, the returning officers don't have these facilities. There is research being done by academics who are being paid by the state, who are quite happy to provide the information, but we just simply aren't asked. So this is kind of something that could be done, and there could be some liaison if those conferences between the commissions and academics and other people conducting research in that area.
In relation to your question on the role of the local authorities, the Department of Finance is involved purely in the financial side of this, and from looking at the costs of the May 2014 event, which amounted to over 12 million euros, I see the princely sum of €3,405.97 were paid to local authorities re queries about the register of electors. Now, it may be that some returning officers are using local authority premises for taking the poll or for counting votes on occasions, but by and large, the local authorities are not involved in the financial side of the operation. It's the central fund, Minister of Finance making payments to returning officers, and then they make onward payments. Much of it is labour costs for people, the presiding officers, the poll clerks, people who count the votes and so forth. Then there are also payments to schools, and most of the returning officers are also officers of the court. They're registrars for the local circuit or the circuit court area, and I know some of them use court premises to store equipment and so forth. But really, in a financial sense, there isn't much of an involvement with the local authorities.
Can I ask you a question in relation to your own point? It's at the end of paragraph 2, at the end of paragraph 1 on page 2. It's the inequitable, as you put it, the inequitable arbitrary means of distributing surplus votes. Just in relation to having been the benefit or the benefactor of the distribution of one of those surpluses, what's the alternative to doing that? Because I've always said this isn't a science. I mean, literally the returning officer picks up a bunch of ballot papers and they distribute a surplus based on that. Now, if you take the elimination of a candidate, for example, and take the geography of that, then the nature of those preferences is going to be skewed in favour of the geographic beneficiary, which goes down to that arbitrary pick up bundles of votes. What's the alternative to that? Or is there an alternative?
Well, you mentioned that they look at the last bundle of votes, and I think in the likes of Longford or Scommon, it affected Dennis Naughton back in 1997. He only got 23% of transfers from his running mate because his running mate was from a different county. So you mentioned that they picked the last pile. The simple method is to pick the whole pile. Why just pick the top pile? And that's what's done. For example, Scotland adopted the single transferable vote for local government elections a couple of years ago. And the method that they use is the weighted inclusive Gregory method. It's also used in Australia. The issue for returning officers is going to be when you examine the whole pile of votes. So let's say the surplus coming to you is 100 votes, but the entire pile of papers is 1,000. That means you're going to be dealing with fractions. Each ballot is only worth 1/10 of the vote. So when you receive this surplus, if that's understandable, you'll have all your ballot papers with your first preferences are worth 1 vote. But these ballot papers that you receive from your running mate are only worth 1/10. And then what happens if that puts you off the surplus? There's going to be fractions of fractions. But that's the method used in other systems, because if you have these votes, why not use them? It's a far more equitable system. Again, this is something that could be, when we did adopt e-voting just on a pilot basis, this wasn't the system recommended, largely because it would have meant different rules for different constituencies. I can understand you would probably need machines if you're counting fractions or fractions, because it was done once by hand in Australia and the votes got mixed up. So we had, in actual fact, some ballot papers being worth more than one actual vote, if that's clear.
Right, interesting. Senator Brennan. Yeah, sorry.
Just on that, because that's something that it's questions often asked, and the one that in relation to the transferable vote, right? And I've heard it explained a few times. So just say, you have two candidates, one candidate is eliminated, the transfers are being distributed, right? How, can you just explain, because I've never made around it, what happens there at that point in terms of how to vote? What bundle of votes
Sure.
do they take?
If it's a candidate eliminated because they haven't reached the quota, all their votes are distributed. It only becomes arbitrary when it comes to the surplus vote. And the pile that is examined is the pile of votes that puts you over the quota. So it's that last pile of votes, wherever those votes came from, be it
The whole lot and be proportional.
well, just to be, that's what I would argue, because those votes, it depends who they're coming from. If it's a Sinn Féin vote that's pushed a Fianna Fáil candidate over the quota, those votes might not be reflective of the entire package of votes. Now, it's argued, for example, that it may not make a huge difference, but in a country like Ireland, where seats have been decided on a very small number of votes, and I examined this in relation to a paper I wrote a couple of years ago using the e-voting data, because it was all put available online for some reason, and I found that votes did vary depending on which particular method of surplus transfer that you used. But again, I'm not advocating a particular method. I'm just saying this is something that a commission could and perhaps should be examining.
Right. Senator Brennan.
Thank you, Chairperson. And the question of the PPS numbers have already come up, and I'm not sure of what the difficulties that you haven't convinced me that the PPS number is not the way forward. I am aware of an individual who voted 10, 11 times in Northern Ireland and was down to vote 5 or 6 times in my county of Louth. And was just caught accidentally. He himself, person to person, told me that he spent the entire day voting in Northern Ireland. He lives in Southern Ireland. That's a problem for Northern Ireland. But we were going to have a problem other than he was on the register in 5 different locations. Incidentally, one polling station was one side of the main road in Dundalk town, and the other polling station was on the other side of the town. And he was listed to vote in both of them. It is a problem, and I believe it's a problem not alone in border counties. I figure it's an issue in our major cities, in our major towns, if we're not vigilant. People who die and are not removed off the register. Our registers are not continually being kept up to date. I'm also aware of people who are married and living in England for the best part of 15 years in one instance, but they're still on the register back home, that in the event of a holiday period, which they do come home to, and coincidentally a polling day or whatever, they would. Just the last question is, Chairman, alternative to schools as venues. I think it's a pity to see so many schools throughout the entire breadth and length of Ireland closed for one day every time there is a referendum or every time there is a voting day. We have alternatives, in my opinion. I'd say there are very few communities throughout the entire country that don't have a community centre or a GAA centre or a soccer centre or whatever, and perhaps looking into the possibility of using these facilities would mean that we'd have less days lost at schools.
Thank you, Senator. And were those points directed to Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms Lambert, and if you want to comment, the other two, get Ms Lambert, you want to?
Yes, and some of those issues cross over with the previous question as well. Part of the issue is going into the nuances of in some circumstances we may have alternatives, so that there's no need for a PPS number. In some instances we may need a PPS number, and then there may be instances in between where we need it for a particular time and then we delete it. But we need to identify and separate what are the individual proposed purposes and consider each of those proposed purposes.
Fingerprinting.
It's also personal data, and you need to go into the considerations of what activity do you want that fingerprint for, what purpose. So it wouldn't be for all of the potential purposes and activities that the Electoral Commission or an Electoral Commission would be undertaking. Take, for example, would part of the Electoral Commission's role to be allocating voting registration numbers to individuals? How would those numbers be allocated? Once those numbers are allocated, is there a need at all then for PPS numbers?
If I could suggest, if I could ask you, how do you ensure that an individual or individuals in any part of our country don't vote on numerous occasions on the one day? What's your main aim to stop and ensure that that doesn't happen? Because it is happening, I have no doubt.
So that purpose is the purpose of duplicity or duplication, so one person having more than one vote. So that's one purpose. You would look at the variety of potential data sets that could assist in that. The Electoral Commission would consider whether the allocation upon registration on the new database, how that would obviate the need for a PPS number, or would require it for a specific amount of time up to the point of registration, but wouldn't be required after that, and then to what extent it would be able to rely on that data, or that identification number, which will be unique and will be national based, and then whether that would need to cross-reference with other things. For example, as one of the questions referred to, when people do pass away, is there a scope for notification or a scope for the Electoral Commission to seek out public information which is publicly available already, and how that would cross over? So there are a number of different issues and problems and concerns. Some of those will be bigger, and some of those will be of lesser concern. Some of them proportionately may be a bigger concern because of the number of people involved. Some of them may be of lesser concern because of the number of people involved. I think there are nuances from a data protection perspective which we haven't got into yet. So my comments and even the comments of the previous Data Protection Commissioner when he addressed some of these points are really highlighting these at a headline level, and my overall point is at some stage, whether it's during the process or whether it gets to the Electoral Commission stage itself, the very details, nuances and justifications for each of the individualised proposed purposes will have to be gone into.
Just the last proposal that I had, the use of community centres, sports centres, whatever, in various parts of the country, and less schools to be closed for the day. Have we looked in, or should we look into that possibility?
Senator, can I say that that's a very good argument for our proposal that the Electoral Commission should act as a coordinating body with the returning officers, or act as a kind of secretariat for the returning officers, and that idea could be put through to an Electoral Commission to coordinate among the returning officers. There's actually nobody fulfilling that type of role at the moment vis-à-vis the returning officers. They are independent entities, and they get together themselves informally to do.
Through the returning officers in or...
Well, they have an association as well, but that's like an association. There is nobody fulfilling that type of secretariat role for the returning officers. I mean, Department of the Environment does the overall policy. Department of Public Expenditure Reform approves the framework for the charges order, and then we make the payments. But there's nobody actually doing that sort of secretariat of coordinating the returning officers. Some of us have done it on an informal basis about certain matters, such as in our case about banking matters, for example. But yeah, it would be an argument for the Electoral Commission, performing that role.
Thank you, Senator. Deputy Carpenter.
It's just a kind of a question, Gaeltacht. Just wondering what stage of the process we're at on this committee with this issue, because this is the third or fourth meeting where the Electoral Commission has been discussed. A lot of the same issues are coming up at each meeting, and I'm just wondering, this is an important issue, particularly as a lot of people are excluded from the register. Rather than voting twice, I'd be more worried about those that don't get to vote. But there's other pressing issues on this committee, so like the housing crisis, etc.
Yeah,
so could you just clarify where we're going next?
Yeah, clarify if you know, okay? We agreed.
Sorry, I might have missed you saying this.
Yeah, you probably did. We agreed the work schedule, and we agreed that we would allocate certain dates in July to discuss the Electoral Commission. And we also agreed different slates of witnesses. So that's what we're doing. We're working through that because there is an urgency about getting the report done, because the Minister is anxious to publish legislation. So we've agreed the month of July the meetings will be centred around the Electoral Commission.
For the whole month of July?
Yeah, yeah. Now we also have select meetings. We had select meetings last week. We have a select meeting this evening.